Furious Driving, proud to be supported by Diamond Bright, protecting, cleaning and caring for the Furious fleet and for yours with 10% off using code FD10. Follow the links in the description below. Hello and welcome to Furious Driving. Now, people keep saying that this channel's gone far too commercial, and today we really have, because we're in a van. This is the Fiesta van, and not just any Fiesta van. This is a Fiesta Sport van, which is not as sporty as the name might suggest, but it is still rather pleasant and rather fun. So let's take a look around this subcompact superstar of the building site, and other trades of course. Now you might remember this van from a video we did last year about rescuing a pair of vans from a sub-basement in London where they've been languishing since COVID. Unstarted, unloved, thick with dust. With this and a Mercedes Vito, we actually managed to get started up with very little problem at all, in fact, it turned out. If this was an American channel, could have just happily just jumped in, driven home and grabbed lunch on the way back. However, because this is the UK and attitudes and laws are an awful lot strict about driving cars that haven't been MOT'd, we had to wait for them to be recovered and MOT'd at home. However, I did get a quick drive of it around the car park, and I was really impressed at how nice this van was. It actually made me sort of start to think, well, do I want a car? As I've got lots of sort of classic and retro cars, could I get by, in fact, with a little van like this myself and reap all those tax savings? Chris, who you may have seen on the channel as well, mobile mechanic friend who's been out and helped me when I've run out of time, tools, talent, patience, or all of the above, and had to stab at some of my cars for me and got me out of a hole now and then. He was the person who was recovering these vans, and he was going to sell this, but he actually really liked it as well, so he kind of kept it, which is understandable because it's really nice. So the Fiesta van, if you're watching in America or Australia, is something we only got here in Europe, and it is astonishingly popular. Because although people might sneer at the point of a van which is not very big, based on a Fiesta obviously, it's actually incredibly useful for an awful lot of companies who've got small moving things needs, whether it's just moving a person and a few tools around, or if it's like a delivery person who's taking sort of delicate stuff like cakes. There are all kinds of businesses who benefit from a small vehicle where you don't want a great big Transit or a Luton or something like that. This is absolutely ideal. Because being a small vehicle, it's got small vehicle running costs, so we're talking MPG in the 50s to the 60s, and because it's a commercial vehicle, it means you can put all the running costs through your business, and because it's rated under 3,500 kilograms, it's actually classified for revenue, I think 1,550 or 1,500 kilos. That means it qualifies for £240 a year road tax. So running this thing is not only cheap, it's tax effective, and if you're looking at people who run things like double cab pickups as company vehicles because it's a tax dodge, it's actually way more practical than that because, well, you don't get stuff nicked out the back, and it uses about a quarter of the fuel, which is fantastic. Anyway, let's get back to the vehicle in hand. This is the Mark VI Fiesta. And it was one of Ford's global platform cars. They wanted everything to be the same across the entire planet so that they could standardise things and cut costs, which is an understandable business decision. There were 4 body styles. There was a 3-door, the 5-door, a saloon in certain parts of the world, not in Europe, and this, which is based on the 3-door, but with the back end changed a little bit. We first saw it back in 2007 as the Ford Verve concept. I think it was shown at Frankfurt initially. I personally saw it, and I was working for a newspaper taking their car motoring photos, and I saw it at a Ford place under wraps, and it was very exciting. And it was in that purple metallic colour that pretty much every Fiesta in the world seems to be for some reason. I guess because it looks quite good in it. It was known internally as Project 299 or Project 409, and built on the global B platform from 2009 to 2018, and they built it literally everywhere around the planet, initially in Cologne and then Valencia for Europe, and then it carried on to Brazil, China, Thailand, Mexico, everywhere. And at one point they were knocking out 300,000 of them a year, and they built that for like a decade. So yeah, they made a lot of them. Now, I actually call this van the reverse mullet because it's party in the front, business in the back. Being the sport van, we've got the body kit, we've got the wheels, we've got the trim at the back, and we've got the good engine. But because it's a van, we've got the full practicality, and because it's a Mark 6 Fiesta, we've got the brilliant styling. We've got the slightly Aston Martin-y front end, and we've got these really cool sculpted sides, which make the car look so much more exciting and interesting than a small car has any right to be. Now let's look around the inside, because it's blooming freezing. So, even though this is a diminutive load lugger, Ford are very keen to stress you could get a lot in here, more importantly than in a Corsa. There's 1 cubic metre of space in here, a metre between the wheel wells, only 0.9 of a metre in a Corsa. It's 806mm high and 1269mm long. Interestingly, there are 4 different weight limits in this, depending which engine you chose, and bizarrely, the smallest petrol takes the most. Now, to properly envanify this thing, they've taken out the back seats, which gives you a ton of space. They fitted metal panels in here instead of windows for extra security, and as standard, you get a half-height, very solid, DIN-rated, whatever that means, bulkhead. You can optionally get a full-height bulkhead as well if you're carrying actual valuable stuff in here, using it as a van. I wouldn't recommend travelling in here unless you're doing car-to-car photography, in which case it'll be brilliant actually. Under the bonnet you've got a choice of 4 engines, starting with a 1.25 litre petrol, which is the least frugal but probably the most peppy and most powerful. Then there's a 1.4 litre diesel, and there's 1.6 in 2 states of tune. The Econetic at 89 horsepower, or this one, the Sport Duratec TDCi at 94 horsepower. Okay, climbing into the slightly warmer cabin, we've got basically the front end of a high-level Fiesta lurking in this commercial vehicle, which is rather nice if you're doing some kind of business work and you want to be a bit luxurious. So we've got a large plastic door with a little bit of fabricy stuff around the door handles and window switches. Little tray just there, curiously, for no good reason. Somewhere for your polos to live, I suppose. Electric windows, little hooky pull thing, electric mirrors, as found in the Mondeo and many others. Decent speakers, good door bins, and a solid door pull. The thing about Fords tend to be solid in the right places. The seats, interesting circly pattern, various materials, so it all looks rather interesting. It's basic hardware in fabric, and this thing has done 185,000 miles, but honestly looks like brand new. You would not believe it to look at it. The seats do still flip forward because it is based on a 3-door, and there's your bulkhead, and that's how far you can put the seat back, so you're not going to be having a nap with the seat fully reclined in this thing. Stepping aboard, and it is pure Mark 6/7, for some reason people seem to call it in the UK, but I don't see any reason for that, Fiesta. So we've got enormous T-shelf area with interesting sculpting, so you can actually spill quite a lot of your gazpacho soup and it won't run back onto your trousers, which is very handy indeed. In the centre we've got a multifunction screen. Being about 10 years old now, or 15 years old design, it's a fairly basic single colour thing. Let's flick the ignition on and we see welcome to Ford, Ford audio, and of course this is our radio, all that kind of stuff, all that jazz lurking up there, which is fine and dandy, because the radio itself is this big sci-fi area in the centre. And if you're a hater of touch screens for everything, you're going to love this, because we've got almost like a cut down version of a Porsche Cayenne. We've got these phalanxes of buttons on either side. On the Porsche it's down by the gear shift, but up here, right up in front of you, there's CD, radio, auxiliary phone menu, and all the numbers, and big air vents, and all very, very curvy, very interesting. Ford have gone all out for the cool, fun, make it exciting to be in. Just because you're not in a big car doesn't mean you can't have good design, kind of design. This little panel down here looks like it should be an ashtray or a cubby or something, but it's not. Underneath that, single zone, but it is aircon, which is fantastic, because back in sort of 2010 era, aircon on a van was not a given thing. Little cubby hole, which is basically useless, and a 5-speed manual gearbox. Curious it's not a 6. Behind that we've got 3 ports. We've got our standard cigarette lighter 12 volt, we've got a USB-A, and we've got an aux in for your phone, a little cubby, which I guess a Nokia probably would have fitted in back then. We've got a pair of cup holders down here, and this has been added as an afterthought by the owner. It's got an armrest with cubby and an extra little ashtray in it, so storage is plentiful. Then the dials themselves. Now this is once you've seen it, you can't unsee it at the moment. If you remember TV of the 1980s, hello rat fans! This is literally Roland Rat staring back at you when you're driving. And I've seen it and now I can never unsee it. I thought it was quite a cool steering wheel until that moment. Looking at the instrumentation itself, Ford have gone all out again to make things, well, just a bit extra really. Look at these needles. They didn't need to have a big silver sculpted chunk at the back end before going into this tapering bright orange thing. It only red lines at 4,500 RPM, but we've still got a rev counter here. And we've got quite an interesting little dial on the speedometer. And like an Alfa Romeo, it's put back and cowled separately with the odometer in the centre, and the only other gauge is the fuel gauge on there. No temperature, just an idiot light will come on if you're overheating. The steering wheel, because as I say, sport van and they're fairly high spec, we have got a nice soft chunky leather rimmed steering wheel, radio controls on, and the horn test. Oh, that's a pop. That means business, but it's going to have fun while it does it. Now curiously, and I've only just noticed this because I'm already seeing it in the daylight for the first time, this dashboard area is actually kind of an ostrich leather style of nubbling, and it's a dark bluey greeny grey. It's very, very interesting. Ford really have tried hard to make this thing quite cool. And we've even got a big glove box that you can fit a lot of stuff in. Headroom is surprisingly big for a relatively small car. Everything about the interior of this car is good. Now, the car-derived van genre has been around since the dawn of motoring. The first pickup was a Studebaker in 1935 or 6 from memory. But of course there was a Ford Model A pickup truck, which is a double A with a strengthened chassis. But since then there have been hundreds of car-based vans where they've stripped out the back seat, panelled in the back windows, and sold you a 2-seater panel van on the body or in the body of a smaller car. Things like the standard Vanguard, I think they did one of those. It was horrible, but they did it. And of course, famously, the Austin A30 and A35. I think Wallace and Gromit. In the late 2000s, the big challengers to the Ford Fiesta would have been the 207 from Peugeot and the Corsa from Vauxhall, which were very similar concepts, but this one really did throw everything at the wall and it all stuck. Obviously you can get more basic versions than this, but this being the Sport has got all of the toys, and of course it's still a Fiesta underneath, which means you've got that fantastic handling and this really nice interior and a great driving position. Now, as the temperature has finally risen to 0 degrees, it was -3 when I started this review, I'm not going to be pushing the legendary handling capabilities of the Fiesta to their limit today, not on the standard summer tyres that are fitted to this thing. But it does of course have the stiff body shell of the Fiesta, the 3-door, I think being the stiffest. That amazing suspension setup, and rather luckily being the Sport one, we've got all the toys, we've got the nice wheels, we've got the body kit, we've got the interior stuff, we've got heated front and rear windscreen, so we've got quick clear in this, which is a godsend on days like this. Air conditioning, the decent radio, electric windows. This is actually a really comfortable place to be. And this is a fairly chunky, bumpy road down through the countryside, and Kent have been pretty bad at maintaining their roads in recent years. And this is riding over this really nicely. You would not believe the galactic miles on this thing, not by a long shot. 185,979 miles on the clock. It drives like a car with like 1% of that. It just feels so tight. The steering is tight, the suspension is tight. There's a slight clonk from the front, but barely noticeable. Now, they call it the Sport van, but that's really more about the body kit and the look of the thing as much as anything else. 0 to 60 is about 11 seconds, top speed is about 110. It's not as sporty as the name suggests, but it has the image, it looks good. This is what a lot of warm Fords have always been about. They give the right impression, and that rubs off and makes the car feel fun and entertaining, which is a good thing. Now, the Fiesta was facelifted in 2012, and that obviously carried over to the van as well. But in 2014, a more practical option came out, the Transit Courier, which was a baby cut-down Transit. It didn't drive quite as nicely as this, because obviously it's not still a Fiesta, but it did have a square back, so it was kind of a bit more practical. If you were actually trying to take a pallet or something somewhere, then the Courier is going to be a bit more what you need. However, if you are a surveyor, a building inspector, anyone working in a business where really you carry yourself and just a few items around, something like this is absolutely perfect. The only problem with this is it's not ULEZ. It's a Euro 5 diesel, which means if you go into London, you're going to have to pay your £12.50. Now, although this van isn't heavy, 1550 kilos or 2 Mark 1 MX-5s, Performance from this 1.6 diesel is, well, let's be generous, leisurely. It just feels like it needs a big turbo strapping on it to give it some oomph, because it really is lacking much in the oomph department as it stands. That does mean you get about 64 mpg, which is very impressive. When I first got in the car and saw a 5-speed gearbox, I was quite surprised to see a diesel with a 5-speed, but having driven it, I think the ratios are probably quite well spaced for extracting some power out of this thing. Now, performance aside, stepping out of my everyday Mercedes into this, the only luxury I'm missing is heated seats. And in fact, driving this around today and thinking of the cost savings, it is very tempting indeed to get rid of an everyday estate car and just climb into a van like this every day. The only problem with running a 2-door van like this instead of an estate car as a work vehicle is that come the weekend, you've not got the back seats to bung the kids, the dogs, go shopping, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't work. It's literally for you and your work equipment. And if you don't need the extra car, perfect. If you do need a car for family stuff, then it is an extra vehicle. Now, admittedly, I'm not short of vehicles. This does make a solid case for itself. Perhaps the most interesting car-derived vans, which I've not had a chance to take out for a test, would be the Freelander and Discovery Land Rovers, which give you all the off-road capability, and of course in a Discovery, a lot of luxury as well, but in a panel van. Very useful indeed. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this ride out in this really rather fun and very practical little utility. If you have, and this has been helpful to you in your buying decisions, then please hit like and subscribe and join us again next time driving something completely different.